disadvantaged, disaffected, and as I said before, the breeding grounds of extremism. This is particularly stark, Madam Speaker, because in recent years, our country has been gaining a respectability and an acceptability in international forums that has eluded us for thousands of years. In some senses, because of our economic growth of the last decade and a half, we have started to again catch the imagination of the rest of the world. We are being talked about as an economic superpower in the making. We are being talked about as a proper superpower in the making. But the fact remains that any superpower status that is conferred upon us by the rest of the world is going to be marred if such a large percentage of our population, such large sections of our geography are going to be left behind. And Madam Speaker, it is not just the world's approbation that we seek. The fact remains that if we cannot carry the majority of our population with us, we risk nationhood. Our country, the idea of India, that which our founding fathers like Mahatma Gandhi and Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel and many others gave their life and blood to define, will be under challenge as it is today increasingly in this corridor of extremism which matches almost exactly with the backward and disadvantaged regions. Madam Speaker, it is amazing that in a country where we can boast of a financial center like Mumbai, which is fast becoming one of the major financial centers, at least of Asia, and sometime in the future, one of the world's major financial centers. In a country where we can boast of an IT powerhouse like Bengaluru. In a country where we can boast of the agricultural breadbasket of the Punjab. In a country where we can boast of the industrial dynamism of Gujarat. We also have other parts of the country which are a far cry from any of these examples. Madam Speaker, let me just read out just the official below poverty line statistics of some of the states that are in this predicament. And as you know, Madam Speaker, our below poverty line criteria itself have been criticized as being too conservative, as not taking into account people who would be considered poor in any other country in the world. But even if we just go by our own definition of what is poor, who is poor, even if we go by our own official statistics of what percentage of our populations are below this poverty line, let us look at these numbers, Madam, and let us note it with a degree of shame that such large parts of our country are being left behind. My own home state of Orissa has a below poverty line percentage of population of more than 45%. The state of Bihar has more than 42% falling into this category of below poverty line people. The state of Madhya Pradesh, more than 37%. The states of Assam and Sikkim, more than 35%. Madam, even if we look at those states which have better statistics than this, as I was making the point a little bit earlier, the fact remains that a lot needs to be done. By some criteria and by some estimates, as many as 800 million people in India can be defined as poor by an independent yardstick. But even if we just stick to the official definitions, even if we just stick to the official statistics, it is clear that we need to do an enormous amount of work to ensure that this regional disparity does not continue. Madam Speaker, it is not only a national shame, it is, and it ought to be, a national responsibility. And I say this because in this august House, as well as in the other House of which I have been a member of nearly 10 years, so often when matters of development and poverty are raised, so often answers are heard that these are states' responsibilities. So often we are given a picture that the centre's job is to legislate, is to plan, is to even accord financial help, but the actual job of implementation is the states. Yes, Madam, we recognize that in a federal entity like ours, the real job of on-the-field implementation is, of course, the states. But national responsibility cannot be declined. National responsibility cannot be turned down. We are speaking here not as a United States of India with all the responsibility left to the states, but as the Republic of India, where the central government in Delhi bears the ultimate responsibility for the country's performance. And Madam Speaker, the reason I mention this is that large chunks of our population from these disadvantaged regions actually hold the center responsible for their predicament. And Madam Speaker, I am from one of those states, and I would like your indulgence to spell out certain important reasons as to why people from my state and these other states that I have mentioned hold the center responsible. Madam Speaker, for 45 years after independence, our country decided and chose to follow a policy where there was a command economy in place. This cannot be faulted to the states. This was a central decision. Those policies were passed in this august house. And the central decision of imposing a command economy on the country cost us very dearly in certain parts of the country. Let me point out some examples, Madam Speaker. There was a policy called freight equalization, which was imposed on the country by the central government in Delhi. And let me tell you, it may sound just like a phrase which doesn't matter anymore because it has been several years since it has been repealed. But for half a century, it bled my state and several other neighboring states, which are mineral-bearing states, into complete poverty. Madam Speaker, any state or any country has certain advantages and certain disadvantages. States like Odisha, states like Jharkhand and Bihar and West Bengal have a certain advantage, a natural economic advantage of having mineral wealth. This should have led to the natural situation that investment in those industries should have come to those states and they should have benefited from it. It did not happen, Madam Speaker, because in a sense, in a twisted sense of national interest, a policy called freight equalization was imposed, which forced the railways to subsidize the transport of raw materials from these states to other states. So that if you're looking at it from an economic point of view, in a very artificial way, it looked exactly the same whether you made an investment in a power plant or a steel plant in Odisha or in some other place which is 1,000 kilometers away. That place 1,000 kilometers away may not have the raw materials, may not have a port, may not have other facilities which normally make such investments viable, but it was artificially made viable. And states like mine and these other states which I pointed out, which did not have the political clout in Delhi, because either we were smaller numbers in parliament or for various other reasons, could not then ensure that the same command economy ensured fairness to these states by providing the public sector investment in these states, which was justfully due, which was economically logical. It just did not find political support. And as a result, tens of thousands of crores of investment, which in any economic logic would naturally have come to these states, simply did not. Our states, these deprived states, these breeding grounds of disaffection, were not only let down, but in a very cynical way, deprived of their natural advantages. This is equivalent to, suppose legislation were to be passed, that Punjab would not be allowed to sow any wheat. Mumbai would not be allowed to conduct financial transactions. Bengaluru will not be allowed to have IT companies. It had the same kind of effect on states like Odisha, states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh. So the central government, the national authorities, do bear a responsibility for making sure that these parts of our country are helped, are giving a helping hand to be brought up. I would like to cite one more example, Madam Speaker. Again, I would like to emphasize on the issue of mineral issues, because these states like mine have a natural advantage when it comes to mineral industries, because we have so many minerals. I can speak with authority in my state. If we talk about iron ore, if we talk about chromite, if we talk about coal, bauxite, dolomite, Odisha has such immense potential, but for 50 years it was held back. Madam, even if we accept that the command economy was good for the country, which I don't, I have just explained why it was not good for large parts of the country. But even if we concede that, Madam, even if we concede that the model of command-driven, central-directed public sector investment was good for national integration. Even then, there was no cause to deprive these states of their natural revenues that accrued from these industries. Madam Speaker, everywhere in the world where mineral industries exist, whether it is Australia or South Africa, whether it is Russia or Kazakhstan, whether it is the United States of America or Poland, the norm for mineral royalties have been based on a principle known as ad valorem. Very simply put, ad valorem means the royalties are a percentage of the market value of the minerals. As everyone knows, mineral prices go up and down. These are cyclical industries. And when the prices go up, obviously the royalties should go up. But in India, we persisted with a peculiar and draconian system which largely exists till today, where the royalties were not ad valorem. Now gradually they have started becoming, with still a few exceptions left. The royalties were administered. And let me tell you, Madam Speaker, how this cruelly deprived these backward regions from their just full dues. Madam Speaker, as you are aware, as this august House is undoubtedly aware, for the past few years, up until last year, there was a boom in the commodities industries throughout the world. Prices of all commodities shot through the roof. Prices of all these minerals that I mentioned shot through the roof. And yet, the state governments got only a pittance. They got a pittance for two reasons. Because the mandarins sitting in New Delhi, to whom it is charged to ensure that at an appropriate time the royalties are to be revised, simply did not do so. Were they subject to lobbying by certain industries? I am not going to comment on that. Were they subject to... I can't actually speculate on why royalties were not revised in time. For example, there was a schedule of the central government to revise royalties every 3 years. The 2005 royalties were not revised until 2007. And the ad valorem system not being in place, the actual amounts of the royalties are such a pittance that it is worse than a cruel joke. Just to give you an example, when the cost of raising a certain ore, for example, I think it was probably iron ore, was no more than 300-400 rupees. And when this very same material was selling in the international markets at 6,000 rupees, that means any party who had the luxury of having a mining lease and could raise the ore at a cost of 300 rupees and could sell that ore at 6,000 rupees, that means 2,000% markup. The state government barely got 30 rupees a ton. It is nothing more than a cruel hoax, nothing more than a cruel joke that these systems were not amended for half a century, and some of the remnants of these systems are still in place, which deprive states like mine and the other states that I have mentioned from having the kind of development that they normally would have had. Some changes have started happening in recent years. In recent years, these mineral-bearing states have started getting together. The chief ministers of Odisha, of Karnataka, of Bihar, of Jharkhand, of Rajasthan have been pressing upon the center to modify these rules and laws that have been passed by this august House and by the ministries and by the officials in Delhi, with only mixed success. Well, there are many committees, I will not go into specifics, but my point, Madam Speaker, is that there are historical injustices that need to be corrected. If they don't, the disaffection that my fellow citizens feel in Odisha and in Bihar and in Chhattisgarh and all these states is but natural, is but justified. It seems as if a callous and careless central government for more than half a century has deliberately decided that our interest in developing the country are only the showcases that we show to the world. The Bengalurus, the Mumbais, the Gujarats, the Punjabs. And we take pride in them. We take pride in the fact that Punjab has developed the way it has. We take pride in the way that Bengaluru and Mumbai and Gujarat flourish the way they do. But that doesn't mean that other parts of the country should be left behind, Madam Speaker. I want to end my examples by mentioning the railways. Madam Speaker, the same railways which was forced by these arbitrary central policies to subsidize minerals so that our natural advantage could be neutralized. These same railways were also induced to make investments in a disproportionate manner, where the railways infrastructure, which makes such an immense difference to the economic development of a region, went in completely disproportionate manner. Madam Speaker, I will cite the example of my own state because I am most familiar with my own state. Madam Speaker, the railways itself uses a measure of its investment, a thumb rule, which is how many kilometers of track they have laid per 100 square kilometers of geographic area. If we go by their own thumb rule, my own home state of Odisha has one of the lowest in the country. What is ironic is that one of our neighboring states, from where many railways ministers have come to the central government over the past 60 years, has the highest in the country. I can understand if you say that certain parts of the country are hard to reach. They are now only laying tracks to Jammu and Kashmir. Certain parts of the northeast don't have railways. I understand that. But how can you have two neighboring states? One has the highest percentage of rail track laid per geographic area, and adjoining it is one of the lowest length of rail tracks laid per geographic area. If this is not discrimination, I ask my colleagues in this august House to tell me what is discrimination. Madam Speaker, I don't wish to speak for very long. I seek the indulgence of the House to support these areas, to make up for these historic shortcomings, because we cannot assuage the ire of these hundreds of millions of people just by talk. There has to be action on the ground. But before concluding, I would like to mention that some of these states, like Bihar and Odisha, have for decades been asking for a special category status. Madam Speaker, I have been part of many delegations of members of parliament from my state and these neighboring states to meet the prime ministers, to meet finance ministers of various governments. And Madam Speaker, we have always been given reasons that to us at least sound like excuses. We have been told that special category status has been narrowly defined to help certain of our states which have the criteria that they have a border area with hostile countries, or that they are in a mountainous region. And that's fully justified. I have been to the Northeast. I know how much there is a need for giving special attention to certain parts of the country. Whether it is J&K, whether it is our border areas like Meghalaya and Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, it is undoubtedly justified that our central government must give them special focus. But Madam Speaker, I would like to submit to this august House that, again, let me cite the example of my own state with which I am familiar. We have one of the longest coastlines in the country. This is also, although it is not exactly an adjoining border with neighboring countries, it is a source of smuggling. It is a source of illegal immigration. It is a source of the kind of problems that we are facing in some of these other states. And Madam Speaker, when you talk of mountainous regions, many of these states that I talked about, including my state, have mountainous regions. What is the importance? In case some of my honorable colleagues would like to wonder what is the issue here, I would like to take a minute of your indulgence to explain. Madam Speaker, many of the central government policies which give tens of thousands of crores of funding, for example, PMGSY roads, many rural electrification projects, they require that only those villages and hamlets which have a minimum population can be included. And when you don't have mountainous regions, when you have more densely populated regions, the criteria of 500 population or 250 population is rather easily met. But when you look at some of the interior regions of Odisha, they are no different from the northeast. Hamlets have about 150 to 175 people, which means we have a large percentage of tribal population, Madam Speaker. We have about 10 million tribal population of 68 different tribes, one of the largest in the country. And they are in similar situation geographically as in some of these other areas where special category status has been accorded. But the fact remains that this population is scattered. It lives in heavily forested areas. The hamlets have populations of less than 250, and as a result, they are excluded from the vast majority of central government schemes, and it is left to the state government alone to take up the burden of development in these areas, which is simply not justifiable. So, Madam Speaker, in coming to the end of what I am urging this august House and my colleagues to support, is that an unbiased look needs to be taken. Certain changes in policy have to be made, because there is, if not bias, there is at least clearly neglect. And whether bias or neglect, neither will be accepted to these large chunks of population who today are boiling with anger. And if we do not take development to each and every village, to each and every family in these areas, the benefits of nationhood, the benefits of being an Indian citizen are denied to them, and there is no way we can make the case that we should all live in harmony. Madam Speaker, in concluding, I would like to point out that there are many pioneering efforts. At the national level itself, there is, of course, the Planning Commission. But the fact is, we have already gone through 10 5-year plans, and we are in the middle of implementing the 11th 5-year plan. And the net result is that such large parts of the country are still neglected. I'm not criticizing the Planning Commission. I'm just saying that for a country of this size, for a population of 1.2 billion, for more than 20 official languages, for nearly half a century of parties in Parliament, things cannot be that centralized. They need to be decentralized. And in fact, there are examples of decentralized development authorities. I give the example of the Northeast, which richly deserves this kind of attention. There is donor. Within states, there are many examples of regional authorities for development. In my own state, for instance, there is an authority called the Western Orissa Development Council, the WODC. But it is obvious to anybody, Madam Speaker, that a state, and that too one of the poorest states in the country, can only afford to give that much funding and that much support to a development authority which focuses on just one part of the state. The point I'm trying to make, Madam Speaker, is that this requires both a national authority headed by the Prime Minister himself, just like he heads the Planning Commission, with the involvement of the Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission. But it also requires dedicated authorities for specific regions, or one, as I'm proposing in my bill, one focused national authority to deal with all the areas which fall into this category. I hope, Madam Speaker, that I will get the support of the government in bringing about such a legislation so that these areas of lack of development can be attended to. Otherwise, Madam Speaker, I put it to this House that these areas will get left behind for longer, and we simply cannot afford to get left behind for another half a century. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Shri Hukum Dev Narayan Yadav.